Today we're going to talk about heat pumps. My name is Ed Brost, and I'm an associate with the Bowman Center for Sustainable Energy. And today, in about heat pumps, we're going to talk about why all the fuss, and we're going to talk mostly about what are they and how do they work, and then we'll touch on a little bit about why you might be interested in having one of these things. So let's start with why all the fuss. Heat pumps are not new. The heat pump was invented, the concept at least, in the mid of the last century. It's almost 200-year-old technology. Heat pumps as machines used to heat buildings and spaces were in common use in the 1920s and continue to be, especially in Scandinavian and Northern European countries. But here we are in the last few half a dozen years or so. All of a sudden, you see heat pumps very regularly being shown, appearing in the media, magazine articles, newspaper articles. Here's a couple of examples, TV spots. So why all the fuss? How come, if this technology is more or less mature, it's been around for over 150 years, why all of a sudden we're hearing so much about it? Well, it's about climate change and about greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. And Canada, like almost all countries in the world, have committed to reducing emissions through a mechanism known as nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. Canada has committed to a 40 to 45% reduction in emissions, GHG emissions, by 2030 relative to 2005 emissions. Now, buildings, what's this got to do with heat pumps? Buildings contribute, if you were to think of all the buildings in Canada as kind of a sector, it contributes to about 13% of Canada's GHG emissions, which is a significant number. We are all probably used to hearing about the oil sands and how greenhouse gas intensive they are. Well, the greenhouse gas intensity of the oil sands as a sector is about 15% of Canada's GHG emissions. So you can see that buildings, if you think of it as a sector, is in the same neighborhood as the oil sands, which is why all the fuss, which is why the government of Canada and other countries around the world are focusing in on heat pumps. And so if you want to get people to adopt heat pump technology, they need to be motivated. And what is the one thing the Homo sapiens are really good at paying attention to? Cost. And so if you could reduce the costs, government incentives, then maybe people would be motivated to reduce their building emissions. Let's look at Ontario. Then I mentioned sectors. Let's look at the emission intensity in sectors and why this is a focus in all provinces and including Ontario. The blue bar here represents emissions from the electrical energy generation sector. And you can see that there was a dramatic drop in the middle of the last decade, and that's because Ontario got off coal. If you look at the orange sector here, that's transportation, and it's tend to be drifting down, more to do with vehicle efficiency than anything else. And here's buildings, right at the same line as industrial emissions. So this is, again, why the fuss going after Ontario, or sorry, emissions in Canada. This slide was put together by an organization called Electrify Now. And don't get too focused on the numbers. Just take a look at the size of the bars, the message that's being conveyed here, because the numbers are very loose. If you were heating your home with furnace oil is pretty expensive, and it would cost you notionally a couple of $1,000s a year, and there's a huge big green bar showing that the expense. And it's carbon intense. It's between 6 and 10 tons per year per house emitted from a home heated by, on average, heated with using furnace oil as a fuel. If you were to convert that furnace oil house to electric heating, and again, this depends on the province and time of day, and some the electric baseboard heater will probably save you a little bit of money, not a lot, but a little bit, and your emissions will go down a little bit from somewhere in the neighborhood of say 6 to 10 down to 5 to 8 tons per year. Natural gas looks like a pretty good deal here compared to these other two. You're going to significantly reduce your fuel costs because natural gas is kind of like close to cheap or close to free. And its emissions are very low compared to the carbon burden. The carbon intensity of burning gas is about half of what it is for oil. And depending on how the generation of electricity is generated, it's in the same ballpark as electricity. Look at the heat pump. It also uses electricity. And so your electricity costs will go up a little bit compared to natural gas. But look at your emissions. Your emissions are going to drop. And I said going up, that's not quite right. The electricity purchases will go down a little bit, even though electricity is more expensive than natural gas on an energy basis, it's still you're going to use less of it. And I'll show you why you're going to use less energy as we go forward. So now we're going to talk about how does a heat pump work? How do you use this? How do you get heat when it's minus 10 degrees C and use that heat to heat the inside of your home? This is a good point to talk a little bit about energy efficiency and versus energy conservation. Energy conservation, at least to some extent, implies a bit of sacrifice. You could save costs and reduce your emissions if you kept your house at 15 degrees instead of 20 and walk around the house with mitts on and a hat and shoes, which is, sacrifice. What we're talking about here is energy efficiency, which is all about making better use of the energy you're buying. And that's what a heat pump is. It's not asking you to compromise or sacrifice your comfort in any way. So how does a heat pump work? First of all, we should talk about different forms of heaters. This is a fossil fuel fired heater of some form, gas or, uh, or oil maybe. And its efficiency is in a range of 70 to 90% efficient. And what we're really doing here is we're taking energy, chemical energy carried by the fuel, natural gas, and we're going to use that energy, we're going to transform that energy into another form of heat energy. We often hear people say, well, what's your energy consumption rate? We don't consume energy, we transform it. And so in this case, it's a chemical energy being transformed into heat energy, and the efficiency. So somewhere between 10 and 30% of the energy you buy is being exhausted outside, in other words, wasted. If you were to convert to electric heating, electric baseboard heater as illustrated here, because it's inside the house, any inefficiency associated with it is still releasing, the inefficiency is it's still being transformed into heat. So your electric baseboard heater is, for all intents and purposes, 100% efficient. Well, how can you do better than that? Let's look at the heat pump. So the heat pump is actually somewhere between 3 and 400%. So and we're not violating any laws of physics here. It's because we're talking about energy transformation. So we're going to take a little bit of electricity to run this thing, and we're going to transform that electrical energy into heat. And as a result, we get 3 to 4 times as much energy in the form of heat, as compared to the amount of energy we used to capture the heat from outside. So we have two very different ways of providing heat. One of them involves energy transformations, and the other one is we're moving energy from outside. But you say it's minus 10 outside. How are we moving energy from outside when it's so cold and we want it to be minus, plus 20 in the house? Well, let's take a look at what it is really like outside. So what we have here is it's a cold winter night, apparently minus 10 degrees C. That's what our thermometer is showing. It's minus 10, but the degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit is a relative scale. It's not absolute. And when we look at the absolute temperature scale, Kelvin or Rankine in the counterpart to Fahrenheit, we have an absolute. The absolute 0 degrees Kelvin is theoretically at least the point at which molecular activity stops. There's no motion anymore. But we live in this balmy little area here of minus 10 to plus 20, plus 30 degrees C. So we are way above. There's a lot of heat, way above 0 degrees Kelvin. We live in this. Hey, what's the temperature outside? Oh, it's 263 degrees Kelvin. There's a lot of heat in the air outside. And this is what the heat pump is doing. It's capturing the heat that's available outside. So now that we know that there's a lot of heat outside to be captured, how do we do that? And to understand how we do that, we really need to understand a little bit more about heat. So if you want to raise a substance temperature, say a liquid, or a solid, doesn't matter, you have to add heat. And so to raise the temperature of water, to using water as an example, to raise a liter of water 1 degrees requires, don't worry about the numbers, but say 4 kilojoules per liter to raise it 1 degree C. That's referred to as sensible heat. Why is it sensible heat? Well, because you stick your hand in it, you can feel it getting warmer. You don't want to use your hand for a thermometer for too long, though it'll get too hot. So you can use a thermometer to sense the temperature of the heat, the temperature of the water as you add heat. And there's a limit here. You can get to, say, 100 degrees C, and you've got this thing boiling on your stove in the kitchen. And but what if you want your water temperature to be 101? Well, a couple of things to keep in mind here. Water at room pressure, at 101 degrees isn't a liquid, it's a gas. And so if you want your water to be 101 degrees, you're going to have to vaporize it. And so you put your stove, put a thermometer in your pot on the stove, and you get the temperature, you'll get it to 100 degrees C, and you'll see bubbles forming. You can turn up the heat, and it'll start to boil really a lot faster. It'll be a fast boil versus a low boil, but the temperature of the water won't change. It's 100 degrees C, and the temperature of the liquid cannot change until you vaporize it. And that vaporizing type of heat is called latent heat. And the reason it's not called sensible heat is because you can't sense it. Your temperature will not change. It doesn't matter how much heat. All you do is change the rate at which the liquid is being evaporated. So in, in summary here on this slide is if you want to vaporize a liquid, you need to add, in the case of water, about 500 times as much energy is required to evaporate the water as is to raise it from, say, 99 degrees to 100 degrees C. So this business of latent heat of vaporization is key to how a heat pump works. Now, sort of like the temperature scale, this 100 degrees C is not a fixed number. We can control the boiling point of liquids. And you see that in your home. If you have a pressure cooker at home, you're manipulating the boiling point of water. A typical pressure cooker operates at about a 15 psi or 100 kPa gauge. And if you were to walk out and look at your car and the tire was half flat, that's 15 pounds. Like that's the kind of pressure. We're not talking about a lot of pressure. You increase the pressure in your pressure cooker just a little bit, 15 pounds, and you raise the boiling point from 100 to 120 degrees C, which is why a pressure cooker cooks your food faster. It's because the water's at a higher pressure than if you boiled it on your stovetop. And that happens because the pressure cooker's is at a higher pressure. The bottom line here on this slide is you can control the boiling temperature of liquids by adjusting pressure. Now, we don't use, well, actually, water is used as a refrigerant in some industrial cases, but normally it isn't. We use a class of chemicals referred to as refrigerants, and the particular refrigerant that we use for most applications, domestic, is something called referred to as R410A. Now, unlike water, which has a freezing point of 0 degrees C and a boiling point of 100, this stuff has different properties, but it follows the same rules. The boiling point of R410A is minus 50 degrees C. So if you had a liter of, if you had some R410A in this room, and this room is at, say, 20 degrees C, this would not be a liquid. It would be a superheated gas. And so because we far at 20 degrees C, we're way above its boiling point at this pressure. If we were to raise the pressure a little bit, say to our half of a flat tire level pressure, the boiling point of our 410A goes from minus 50 to minus 20. So it's now we got a boiling point that's at fairly low pressure, quite a bit higher than than at atmospheric pressure. Continuing this discussion around manipulating boiling point with pressure, if we increase the pressure a lot to, say, a high pressure truck tire level pressure, 200 pounds or 1400 kPa, this boiling point of this liquid now is plus 40 degrees C. And it's these properties of R410A coupled with the latent heat and sensible heat discussion is why or how a heat pump works. So let's just take a look at a heat pump. So this is a typical installation. This happens to be the one outside our home. And so we're going to use this thing to collect a cargo of heat from outside. So let's take a look inside this thing by moving the casing over there and have a look inside. Well, you can see these fins. That's this cartoon. This is these are called evaporator in the case of a heat pump operation. The evaporator. This is the fans, and you can't really see it, but there's two lines here. One of them is coming into the house, into the heat pump outside unit, and it's a liquid. This liquid coming outside is kind of warm. It's at about 1,000 kPa, so it's a little bit. It has at this pressure, the boiling point of our refrigerant is about 40 degrees C. Now, the temperature outside is minus 10, so there's no way that minus 10 is going to vaporize this liquid. So we need to do something about that. Inside our box here is a device called an expansion valve or a pressure reduction valve. And what it's going to do is it's going to manipulate the boiling point. How? By lowering the pressure. So it's going to cause this liquid to expand and at the pressure again, it's sort of like a tire that's half flat. The boiling point of those conditions is minus 20. Well, with this boiling point, this outside air is a balmy minus 10. There's loads of temperature driving force, if you like, to vaporize, fully vaporize this liquid in this condenser. And so that's what's going on out here. And here is we're literally, because we lowered the pressure, manipulating the boiling point, allowing this cold air to vaporize or add all that latent heat. Remember the water 500 to 1 or 500 times to this. And so out of this thing, out of this, out of these fins or evaporator comes a gas. Now this gas, because this air is minus 10, is minus 10 degrees C, and it's at a relatively low pressure, 125 kPa. That's not so. This gas has picked up the cargo of heat. Unfortunately, it's too cold. So what are we going to do? We're going to raise the temperature. We're going to add some sensible heat to this gas, and we're going to do that using a compressor. Now, if you've ever blown up a bicycle tire with the hand pump, you may have noticed that the pump gets hot. And it's not because of friction in the pump. It's because as you compress a gas, it gets hot. And so our compressor is going to be bringing in electricity, a little bit of electricity, and all it's trying to do is add a bit of latent heat, sensible heat to the gas. And so this is where this efficiency thing comes in. We're adding sensible heat instead of latent heat, which is done here. And the only electrical input is that of these fans. And so now what we've done is we've raised the temperature of our gas to about 50 degrees C, and we've raised the pressure to 1400 kPa, or high pressure truck tire level pressure. And by doing that, we've manipulated the boiling point again. We've raised the boiling point from minus 20 to plus 40. So that's what's going on in the outside unit here. Let's take a look at the inside unit. So this is now called the condenser in the house. Down here we have a natural gas furnace with its fan, and so it's not running. It's just simply the air handler for the house air. And we see two pipes coming in. This black pipe is an insulated pipe, and that's carrying the high temperature, high pressure gas at 50 degrees C. And this is the return line going up back out to the outside unit, carrying relatively high pressure liquid at, say, 30 degrees C. Let's take the casing apart like we did before and have a look inside what's going on. Well, in here we have another set of fins, but instead of being an evaporator, these are same kind of fins though. It's the condenser, and what we have is the air handling unit blowing cold air, say 20 degrees C air into this box, and we have and we have our hot gas coming in and being exposed on the other side of the metal fins, this cool air. And what's that going to do? Because 20 degrees C is way below the boiling point, so it's going to cause this refrigerant to condense. So quite literally, inside this condenser, it's raining our refrigerant. It's being cooled, turned into a liquid, and then as a result, it's given up its heat, that cargo of heat from outside and it was 40, so the air going into your home was 30, maybe a little warmer than that, 30 degrees C to heat your home. We have this liquid now, it's at 30 degrees C, and it's going outside back to the outside unit. So that's the evaporator outside, the condenser inside. Let's put the whole thing together and see what it looks like as a system. So what we have is our liquid coming out. It's going through that magic expansion valve that's inside this box to lower the pressure and the boiling point. It's coming out of this evaporator outside as a cool gas, 125 kPa, and it's because the outside air is minus 10, this is more or less minus 10 as well. Goes into the compressor. The compressor heats the gas, raises the pressure, and so we have a loop, and it goes around in circles like that. The stuff goes out, picks up its cargo of heat, liberates it in the house, releases it into your home, and goes back again for another loop. So that's how the heat pump works. Let's talk about for a minute or two just why might you be interested in buying a heat pump. Well, there are at least two drivers. One of them, economics. Can we save a little bit of money doing this? And the other one is about your GHG footprint. So the first one, let's take a look at our heat pump versus a conventional furnace when we talk about economics. So we're looking at energy costs here. Heating oil is nominally 20 cents. You can convert a liter of fuel oil into energy. Kilowatt hour is an energy term. It actually is a when you work out it is a joule. So heating oil is 20 cents a kilowatt hour. Electricity is about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Natural gas is very cheap. It's mostly 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So it looks like, oh, fuel cost for this thing is way cheaper. Let's go to the furnace. Well, before we go there, let's look at the efficiency here. 10% of what you're buying here in terms of heating oil or gas is going to be wasted, maybe more. So it's going to go out. And so these numbers might be a little bit higher. But when you look at your heat pump, remember I said at the beginning that the heat pump, because we're going to take a little bit of electricity and we're going to use that to capture out heat that's available for free outside. And in doing that, it's 3 to 4 times as efficient. So when you correct the systems for efficiency, the net effect is that the energy input cost is about 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour, which means that your heat pump is actually running, it uses less energy because it's more efficient. How does that translate into real dollars? Well, a friend of mine, John Ward, has carried out a fairly rigorous analysis of his own home heating costs before and after he put in ASHP, refers to air source heat pump. And so in the winter months, he has found that he's saving about $70 a month on energy costs. So heat pumps, he's going to use more electricity because he's running a heat pump and using less gas because he has a heat pump. He doesn't need the gas. And the net effect of energy is about $70 a month for the winter months. And then when you consider the shoulder, spring and fall, this annual savings is about $600, almost $600 a year. So there is a little bit of money to be saved here by running a heat pump compared to in Southern Ontario, a natural gas furnace. So that's the economic argument. What about our personal GHG footprint? Maybe you just want to do your part. So again, this is about energy efficiency. We're not asking you to be freezing in the dark at all. It's just about making better use of the energy that you're buying and having less emissions. And so you can ask yourself, what's rhetorical question, is it our responsibility to reduce our own emissions? Or we'll just be a free rider and expect people in other countries to reduce their emissions more than what they need to meet the global emission targets. If you think that we have some responsibility, you might want to think about what does it mean in the context of the rest of the world. Well, Canadians on average, about 17, 18 tons of CO2 equivalent per person each year, 17 tons of CO2. The United States is a little bit higher, 19 tons per year, but these are practically the same number. If you were to go to take a look at Australia, they're quite a bit better than us, 16 tons per year. Germany and China, Germany, same kind of climate that we have, northern China for sure, but they're only emitting 9 tons of CO2 per person. Look at Spain at 6 tons per person. The global average, which includes a lot of southern countries and developing countries, as well as northern countries, the global average is 5. So there seems to be room for Canadians to do their bit. And one way you can do your bit is by adopting heat pumps, especially taking advantage of the government incentives that are available to consumers. So that's our story on heat pumps. If you are interested in more information or you want to communicate with us about this topic, you can feel free to go to bowmancenter.com and contact us. Thank you very much.